After photographing foggy forests so many times, I think I have a secondary feeling, if you want. Now, as you can see, around me there is no fog, but I have a suspicion that if I go a little bit higher, I'll be blessed with fog and I'll manage to take some interesting photos. Already the forest is a combination of green and yellow and orange and dark browns, and it looks fantastic. It's a great moment to be in the forest, that moment when the forest basically crosses from the green of the summer to the yellow and red of autumn. And as predicted, the fog is up there, so glad to find it. It's time for me to get my other camera, my tripod, and to start photographing the forest. Okay, so what am I using today? Canon 6D, a full frame body, 24 to 105mm lens, f4 from Canon, an L bracket, this is from Manfrotto, cut by me, and the tripod. And I'm gonna try and photograph the forest in the best way as possible. A short tip to photograph foggy forests, and you can contradict me or you can say your opinion in comments below, but I think the landscape in front of you is what really matters, not really the fog. So by this I mean, don't look at my foggy forest and go and photograph any forest in fog, because any forest will not do, any forest will not look good enough to be photographed. The forest is chaos, is clutter, and you need to find a forest that has some wider trails, that has a flat land, that looks beautiful even without fog. Fog is the element that adds surprise, that adds mystery, that adds an interesting feeling, if you want. But this is not the element that really makes the photo. The photo is made by the landscape, by how the landscape looks. So this is my first tip. Look for a landscape that looks good without fog, and then you add fog and you kind of get a magical landscape. Judging by how the fog gets lower, I don't think it's going to be one of those days when I have fog in the forest for hours and hours, so I'll just have to hurry and also be very careful how the fog moves, because in this direction, for example, there's a lot of fog. Over there is less fog. So tip number 2, pay attention to how the fog moves and move along with it. The reason for which I came over here to photograph, it's because, as you can see, the trail kind of goes into the forest, and then I have another trail coming from below over there. And these trees will function as, let's say, stopping elements, will not let the eye go to one side or another. But I will have 2 levels of the forest. One trail going this way and another one coming from down below over there. I think this creates a much more dynamic shot, a much more interesting photo to look at. Now, in terms of settings, f11, 0.8 seconds, and white balance in a situation like this, I keep it on daylight because I want to have a much more bluish look of this entire forest. So this would be, all this talk would be tip number 3 to help you kind of get a feeling of how I'm planning and how I'm thinking my foggy forest photos. Tip number 4, be aware of the light. The light changes very quickly in the forest, especially when you have fog and the fog is moving. So always be consistent with your exposures. Make sure you expose for the highlights, and this way you will have all the tonal range in your image. The forest looks good, but it needs to be exposed properly. So make sure you keep an eye on the light. Tip number 4. And tip number 5, as always, is a tip that will not basically do you any good. Have fun. How many times you heard this on YouTube? The last tip is something like, have fun. So I will try to avoid this and tell you that tip number 5 would be try and experiment. Experiment with different lenses. For example, I photograph with 50 millimeters, I photograph with 85 millimeters at 1.2 aperture, at 2.2. This way you create a shallow depth of field and you have a much more diverse and interesting shot. So experiment with the way you approach things. Shoot high, shoot low, shoot from any angle, shoot in portrait mode, in landscape mode. So all these are tip number 5, and I really hope you enjoy this short list of tips. 5 tips for you to photograph better autumn foggy forest photography. And if you like it, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, share this video, and you can also support me by buying one of my editing courses. The link is in the description of this video, and it also includes a video on how to edit forest photography. So until next time, keep on photographing, because it's the only way you can get better. Bye bye.